December 1944, Luxembourg. The Battle of the Bulge had been underway for 3 days, and 3rd Army Headquarters was operating under extreme strain with no real rest for roughly 72 straight hours. A captain from a forward artillery unit was brought in specifically to justify why his battery had pulled back without authorization, leaving 2 operational guns behind during a crucial phase of the German counteroffensive. He arrived expecting discipline and reprimand. Instead, what he delivered in front of 6 officers gathered around the same map table was an accusation no one anticipated hearing spoken aloud. He stated that Patton remained secure behind the front lines, issuing orders that led other men to their deaths, while never personally confronting the real cost of those decisions in blood. He spoke it directly. He used the word coward intentionally, not in anger without control, but as a calculated choice, the kind of word a soldier only uses when he no longer expects consequences that matter to him. The room fell into complete silence. 2 officers present would later say they fully expected immediate arrest for insubordination. Patton did not raise his voice. He did not shift away from the map table. He looked at the captain for a long, steady moment, then spoke 5 words that none of them were prepared for. Say that again slowly. Before any further events unfolded, the captain was identified as Thomas Rayburn, 28 years old, commanding a battery of the 109th Field Artillery, attached to a formation that had been forced back heavily near the village of Wiltz in Luxembourg during the opening phase of the German offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. His unit had been holding an advanced position when it came under direct German armored pressure on the 2nd day of the attack. Enemy tanks were closing in on both flanks faster than expected based on available intelligence at the time. With no infantry remaining to protect either side, Rayburn chose to withdraw rather than risk total encirclement and destruction of his battery. During the retreat, 2 guns had to be abandoned after being disabled and spiked by their crews, since there was neither time nor transport to recover them under fire. 2 days later, he was ordered to report to 3rd Army Headquarters to explain the loss of equipment, as was standard procedure for commanders who lost artillery pieces without them being directly destroyed in combat at the moment. By the time he arrived, Rayburn had not slept properly for nearly 4 days. He had personally witnessed 11 men from his battery killed during the fighting around Wiltz, including a sergeant who had served with him since basic training years earlier, long before the war brought them to Luxembourg. He had eaten almost nothing resembling a full meal since the offensive began 3 days earlier. When he stepped into the crowded headquarters room, he was already beyond the point where most officers could maintain normal restraint in front of a 4-star general and his staff. After Rayburn repeated his accusation clearly, exactly as Patton had instructed him to do, the room stayed silent for several more moments. Patton's chief of staff, who had been standing nearby throughout, later wrote that he found himself instinctively calculating what formal charges would apply and how quickly the process could be handled, given the demands already on headquarters that week. Close enough that several officers in the room later stated independently that they expected a physical clash to break out between the 2 men in front of everyone. "You think I am safe back here?" Patton said, his tone controlled but projecting across the entire room. "Tell me what you believe a safe war looks like for a 4-star general, just 3 days into the largest German offensive since 1940, with weather conditions grounding all air support and half of my staff urging a withdrawal instead of advancing to reach troops currently surrounded in the field." Rayburn did not respond at once. He remained standing there, visibly engaged in an internal struggle that those observing could not fully interpret. Patton went on without pause. "I have buried more men I knew personally than you have men in your entire battery, Captain. Over the past 3 years, I've made decisions that led to the deaths of friends. I made them anyway because every other available option at the time resulted in even greater losses. That is not safety. That is the job, the entirety of it." Then he pressed further. "You want to stand here and claim I do not understand what those 2 guns cost you and your men? Very well. Then tell me, right now, in front of everyone in this room, what real understanding looks like from your position." Rayburn, according to his later account in an extended interview with a military historian, said something changed in him in that moment. Not fear of Patton, but a sudden and uncomfortable recognition. He stated that his earlier defiance faded, and he admitted he did not actually believe Patton was a coward in any literal sense. He explained that he had used the word because he needed someone in that room to carry responsibility for what had happened to his men, and Patton was the only available target for that need. Patton's reaction, according to 3 separate independently recorded accounts from officers present, was neither anger nor forgiveness. It fell into something in between that none of them could clearly define afterward. He told Rayburn that he understood the need to assign blame when faced with loss. He admitted he had experienced that same need many times over the past 3 years of war. He added that the difference between a soldier and a man who breaks is not the presence of anger, but whether he continues to perform his duty while carrying that anger privately. He then shifted the discussion to a practical matter. He asked whether the 2 abandoned guns near Wiltz could still be recovered, and what resources in men, time, and support would be required to make it possible. Rayburn, unsettled by the abrupt change from confrontation to operational planning, replied that the area was still under German control, but could likely be retaken within 48 hours if reinforcements arrived in time to support a coordinated assault. Patton immediately turned to his staff and ordered a reinforced company dispatched to retake the position, explicitly stating the recovery of the 2 guns as a tactical objective, along with the broader strategic importance of holding that ground in the wider battle developing along that sector of the front. He made no reference to Rayburn's accusation while issuing the order. He treated it as if the earlier exchange regarding cowardice and blame had not interrupted the operational flow of the war. He was never formally reprimanded in writing for the accusation in any surviving wartime record. The only official paper preserved from that meeting was the routine after-action report on the loss of the 2 guns near Wiltz. That report recorded, without further detail, that the pullback had been assessed as tactically required due to a total lack of flank support at the moment the decision was taken. The position close to Wiltz was retaken by the reinforced company 4 days later, after combat that participants later described as among the most intense close-quarters fighting of that stage of the wider battle. Both abandoned guns were later recovered in largely intact condition during the operation. They were restored to service within a week and assigned to another battery, having suffered only limited damage from exposure to weather and from German units that had moved through the area in the intervening period. Rayburn remained in service through the rest of the Battle of the Bulge and continued into the American advance into Germany during the following spring. He was eventually promoted to major before the end of the war in Europe that May. The promotion followed normal procedures and made no reference to the December confrontation at Third Army headquarters. More than 30 years later, he gave a single detailed interview about that incident to a military historian collecting oral accounts from officers who had served under Patton during the Bulge. In that interview, Rayburn said he had spent decades trying to understand why Patton did not immediately end his career after the accusation made in front of 6 witnesses. Over time, he concluded that Patton had seen something in him that he himself, in that exhausted state, could not clearly recognize. He came to believe the anger he expressed that morning was not truly directed at Patton at all, and that Patton had understood this from the beginning, perhaps even before Rayburn understood it himself. The Sergeant Rayburn lost near Wiltz, who had served with him since basic training, was later identified in records as Sergeant Walter Denor, 26 years old. He was killed by artillery fire while overseeing movement of the battery's 3rd gun during the initial withdrawal under pressure. Rayburn referred to Denor only once in that later interview. He said he had been thinking about him in the moments before entering headquarters and making the accusation that nearly ended his military career. Even so, he could not fully explain how that grief became directed toward a 4-star general far from where Denor actually died. The 6 officers present in the room that day later disagreed on how to interpret what they had witnessed. Some described it as a rare act of restraint by Patton, choosing not to use full disciplinary authority available to him. Others saw it as Patton recognizing something familiar in Rayburn's exhaustion and grief, something he'd encountered in himself at earlier stages of his own long military career, years before this war began. Patton's chief of staff, who had initially considered formal charges during the confrontation, later described the episode as one of the clearest expressions of Patton's leadership style and practice. He distinguished it from the public image of volatility that had long surrounded Patton and continued to influence historical interpretation of him long after the war ended. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.